An alarming new report shows the infant mortality rate in Gaza has risen for the first time in more than 50 years. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees found that until now, the number of babies dying before the age of 1 has consistently fallen in the past 5 decades in Gaza. Meanwhile, the family of an 18-month Palestinian baby and father killed in an arson attack by Jewish settlers reportedly will not be entitled to the same government compensation granted Israeli victims of terror. On Tuesday, the Israeli newspaper Haaretz reported the Israeli law governing such compensation applies only to Israeli citizens and residents, as well as West Bank settlers. Palestinian victims must apply to a special interministerial exceptions committee under the Israeli Defense Ministry. Earlier this month, thousands of mourners in the West Bank attended the funeral of the Palestinian father, Saad Dababsheh, who succumbed to severe burn injuries just 8 days after trying to save his son, Ali, from the arson attack. This is Taha Dababsheh, a relative of the family.
First, we condemn this ugly crime, which happened for the first time in history. People were sleeping, and the bats of the night came upon them to burn them. A toddler was killed a week ago, and his father died today, and we hope his mother and brother Ahmed recover in the hospital. We ask the community and all the free people of the world to help us and stand with us and our people, and we ask for protection committees for our village against the settlers.
Meanwhile, Jewish and Palestinian women are holding a hunger strike outside Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem to call for a renewal of peace negotiations. Members of the group Women Wage Peace have been fasting for the past month in alternating shifts, sitting in an open-air tent and inviting passers-by to discuss how best to wage peace. The group has dubbed their mission Operation Protective Fast, a twist on Operation Protective Edge, Israel's military operation that left 2,200 Palestinians, including 550 children, dead last summer. On the Israeli side, 73 people were killed, all but 6 of them soldiers. The attack destroyed 12,000 homes in Gaza. Another 100,000 were damaged. None of the destroyed homes have been rebuilt so far, due in part to the ongoing Israeli blockade. Women Wage Peace are urging Israeli cabinet and Knesset members to prioritize peace talks with Palestinians. Well, our guest for the hour suggests the best chance for achieving a lasting peace in Israel-Palestine lies not in Netanyahu, but the United Nations Security Council, with the U.S.'s support, presenting both parties with clear terms for resumed peace talks. In a Democracy Now! Special, we spend the hour with Henry Siegman, the former executive director of the American Jewish Congress, long described as one of the nation's big 3 Jewish organizations, along with the American Jewish Committee and the Anti-Defamation League. Siegman was born in 1930 in Frankfurt, Germany. 3 years later, the Nazis came to power. After fleeing Nazi troops in Belgium, his family eventually moved to the United States. His father was a leader of the European Zionist movement, pushing for the creation of a Jewish state. He later became head of the Synagogue Council of America. After his time at the American Jewish Congress, Siegman became a senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. He now serves as president of the U.S. Middle East Project. Amy Goodman spoke to Siegman in May, shortly after he published a piece in the New York Times called "Give Up on Netanyahu, Go to the United Nations."
So why don't you start off by talking about just what you are suggesting President Obama do?
Well, what I am suggesting he do, and what many others have suggested as well, indeed for some time now, is that he finally act on a truth that he understood for quite some time now, namely that any government that is headed by Netanyahu not only is disinterested in pursuing a 2-state solution, but indeed sees as its primary mission and goal, policy goal, is to prevent a 2-state agreement. And he and his various governments have acted on the assumption that there is no occupation, that there may be disputes about how much land Israel has a right to annex to the State of Israel in the West Bank, but Palestinians do not have any particular right, certainly not a right greater than Israel has, to any part of the West Bank. That has been the working assumption of every government headed by Netanyahu. So for that reason, we have said for a long time to the president, in various communications and meetings with the Department of State and the White House over the years, that the peace process, the bilateral talks that have taken place, are all bound to fail unless America's diplomacy is based on a recognition of this fundamental truth, that left to their own devices, Israelis will never agree, an Israeli government will never agree to a two-state solution that is remotely acceptable to the Palestinians. Consequently, it seems clear that the only way a two-state accord can be reached is if the UN Security Council, a third party, and of course the most reasonable third party to take the lead is the Security Council, because the various resolutions on a two-state solution adopted by the Security Council are the foundation of any peace process.
In March, newly re-elected Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tried to walk back his pre-election vow not to allow a Palestinian state. A day before the election, when asked if he was ruling out establishing a Palestinian state under his tenure, Netanyahu replied, quote, "Indeed." But he later tried to backtrack in an interview with NBC's Andrea Mitchell after tremendous international outcry.
I haven't changed my policy. I never retracted my speech in Bar-Ilan University 6 years ago, calling for a demilitarized Palestinian state that recognizes the Jewish state. What has changed is the reality. Abu Mazen, the Palestinian leader, refuses to recognize the Jewish state. He's made a pact with Hamas that calls for the destruction of the Jewish state. And every territory that is vacated today in the Middle East is taken up by Islamist forces. So
but they are saying
we want that to change so we can realize a vision of real sustained peace. And I don't want a one-state solution. I want a sustainable, peaceful two-state solution. But for that, circumstances have to change.
In the final days of the campaign, Netanyahu stressed his right-wing positions. He visited the Har Homa settlement and vowed to ramp up the construction of more settlements in occupied East Jerusalem. And he unequivocally ruled out allowing a Palestinian state, reneging on his nominal 2009 endorsement of a two-state solution. On Election Day, he also railed against Israel's Arab voters.
Right-wing rule is in danger. Arab voters are streaming en masse to the polling stations. The left-wing non-profit organizations are bringing them in buses. Go out to the polling station, bring your friends and family, and vote Likud in order to close the gap between us and the Labour Party. With your help and God's help, we will form a national government and protect the state of Israel.
So that was Prime Minister Netanyahu in his election campaigning. Henry Siegman on the issue of Arab voters and on the issue of the two-state solution.
Yes. Well, one has to be extremely naive to have waited for this admission and declaration, proud declaration by Netanyahu, that he never meant it, that when he embraced a two-state solution, he was lying. It simply was not true. If one had to wait until then to conclude that he really never meant to proceed with a two-state peace accord, for the simple reason that every action taken by his government with respect to Palestinians who live past the 67 border, every action he has taken was consistent with Israel's ultimate permanent control of all of the territories. Beginning with, of course, the settlement project. How is it conceivable that a government that is serious about reaching a two-state accord, a viable two-state accord, not just for Israel but for the Palestinians, one they could conceivably accept, cuts the ground from under that state in the most literal sense by annexing it to the state of Israel? So somebody had to wait until he made that statement. I mean, that's, for diplomats, that's rather pathetic. What it really suggests is that because they're not stupid, they may be inept, but they're not stupid. And they understood from the beginning that they were dealing with a prime minister who had no intention whatever of yielding Israel's control. So they had to pretend that they believed that in order for their diplomacy to go forward. Otherwise, you know, they are unemployed.
And his call for Jewish voters to come out to counter the Arab vote?
Yes, well, that tells you something about his commitment to a democratic state of Israel.
And the fact that he tried to walk back his statement against a two-state solution.
Yes, and you reverted to his earlier diplomacy, as it were, because this has been a strategy from the very beginning. He had to balance, on the one hand, his determination never to yield control over the West Bank with a public posture that enables the United States at least to pretend that a two-state solution is possible if the two parties negotiate successfully. And this he has done wonderfully. So the fact that he walked it back is really utterly meaningless.
Talk about Netanyahu's formation of a new government and who he has chosen to be his ministers.
Just to follow up on your previous question, he has now come out with a new ploy, which is, again, so wonderfully consistent with the totally dishonest approach he has had from his very first government that he headed to the issue of a ultimate two-state agreement. He has now proposed to the Palestinians that they sit down and negotiate the borders of the settlements. Now, on the one hand, that creates the impression that he wants to negotiate, he wants a peace process, and secondly, he is open to some kind of agreement that might ultimately lead to a state, without yielding or in any way walking back his position that there is no 67 border. And consequently, there is no reason why Israel is obliged to withdraw from the territories. Now, I would hope that the Palestinians, it's quite clearly they're not going to be taken in by this, but it would be interesting if they were to say, fine, it's a wonderful proposal, but let's do this in a fair way. Let us also discuss what we are permitted to do on your side of the 67 border, what settlements we can have there, and what the borders of those settlements will be. And it's unfortunate that they have not challenged Netanyahu's government in that way.
Why do you think they haven't?
Well, I think it's just inept. I mean, this whole question of the ineptness of the Palestinian leadership is a very sad story. Or I should say the ineptness of Palestinian leadership. The fact that they agreed, going back to the Oslo Accords, or even going back to this goes back to 1988, their acceptance of Israel's legitimacy, one would have thought they would have said, at least conditionally, we're ready to accept and affirm Israel's legitimacy if Israel is prepared to affirm the legitimacy of a Palestinian state along the pre-67 borders. The fact that they did not do that and did not even raise the issue of settlements was a massive, massive blunder. And I think made it possible for Netanyahu's people like him to play the game that they've played.
Former executive director of the American Jewish Congress, Henry Siegman. He's now president of the U.S. Middle East Project. We'll air more of Amy Goodman's interview with him in a minute.